early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.
One of the reports talked about some of the insinuations that have been in the news space. That's about the circulation of the old and the new notes. There were concerns yesterday as regards whether the old notes, talking about 200, 500, and 1,000, is going to cease to be in circulation by December 31st, 2024. But the CBN was quick to also clarify that there's a Supreme Court order giving the CBN the power to ensure that the old notes are still in circulation, indefinitely. What do you feel about that, Blessing?
I think that's good. It calms the tension that would have built up if the CBN had not reacted quickly to that speculation. You understand that we're almost in the UTAD, and this is where commercial activities peak. So people thinking that, the old notes would cease to be legal tender by December 31, that would affect purchase of things, people accepting the old notes, demanding for transfers, and we might have just gone back to that situation that was experienced around December, February to February last year, when there was naira scarcity. So I think for those who were speculating, peddling rumors that it would cease to be legal tender, have gotten some clarification. Everybody is at ease now that they could go do transaction, because cash is still very much in demand in our economy.
Thankfully, this has been addressed. We don't want to have that nasty experience that we had as regards naira scarcity.
A terrible experience that left some horrific memories. After a long period of clamor by Nigerians for a reshuffle or a shake-up of the president's cabinet, and some other committees set up to look into that, and for about a month, Nigerians have been anticipating the cabinet reshuffle by the president. Eventually, that has happened, and there are mixed reactions regarding the reshuffle of President Tinubu's cabinet. So the president has sacked 5 ministers and has reassigned 10 to new portfolios and appointed 7 new ministers that will be confirmed by the Senate. Looking critically into the reshuffle of the president's cabinet, we have Dr. Idahosa Osamhanze, who is a policy expert in the studio. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, great Nigeria.
Good SOUQ.
I was expecting that.
Good SOUQ, great Nigeria.
Great Nigeria. In our lifetime, we'll see that greatness happen.
We'll say amen to that.
Yeah.
It's great to have you on the show today.
My pleasure to be here with you.
Glad you have
been a
joined
while.
us.
Quite some time.
You could see the outlook. The
Yes,
weekend is
it
loaded.
looks Owambe, never disappoints. Bringing on the African look. So, here we are.
Yeah.
The president has rejigged his cabinet with let me use Femi's words, some ministers have been let go, and some has been reassigned new portfolios. 7 have been appointed. They would be confirmed by the Senate. But let's look at the 5 that have been let go and the 10 that have been reassigned. There are mixed reactions. Some Nigerians feel this wasn't the reshuffle that they expected. There are reactions from some quarters that expected that more ministers would have been let go on the ground of poor performance. But what's your take?
Well, I don't know what indicators or metrics that people would want to use in determining who is performing or who is not performing. And I think one of the things that we must give to Mr. President was on the first day he came into office, he was very sure that he was going to measure the performances of the ministers. And to that very extent, Hadiza Bala Usman was appointed as a special senior advisor to the president on monitoring and evaluation of the performance of those who have been assigned role. Hadiza has submitted a report to the president, and I think it will just be nice for people to have seen that report to see whether the reshuffle was in order or not in order. For you to stay outside of the cabinet to be able to speculate who should go or who should remain, I don't think that is an objective way to look at such a phenomenon. A lot of people can have their reservation, but I think the appointing person is the one who is better fit to be able to look at who should go, who should not go, based on the metrics or the KPIs that you have given to people to actually be able to deliver. I know that we've been through some very tough time as a country, and people are expecting that a lot should happen very quickly in terms of transformation of the country. But I think that everything takes some processes, and so till you really go through the whole hog, you will not be able to establish whether people have performed. Don't forget that we are living in an environment where a lot of difficulties are really currently plaguing the system. If you ask a minister and said this man is not performing, on what basis are you going to assess it? When, of course, even MDAs are not receiving their budgeted allocation to be able to deliver on capital projects. Also, look at the budget itself. You're seeing that what are we really going to expect? Take, for example, the 2024 budget. The 2024 budget was predicated on the fact that it's going to be private sector driven. 78 or 76% of that budget is to be funded from the private sector end. The government is only looking towards driving it from its own end with about 24% and thereabouts. So these are the indicators that should be on the ground so that it can be as objective as possible in terms of assessing other people's performances.
Now, let's look at the mixed reactions that have greeted this decision. You have some Nigerians who have the opinion that if the president has decided to sack, or if I'm okay, we're trying to be mild about it, but that's the reality. If the president has decided to let go 5 ministers, and now you are appointing 7, some fear that will have been an opportunity for the president to have, achieve the need to have a leaner cabinet, reduce the number of appointees. If you're removing 5 and now you're appointing more, then there are those who also argue that this might just be a way to create like what you call save its face of its administration from the present realities, that it might not outrightly be a way to address the problem Nigeria is facing as a nation. How do you react to this mixed reaction greeting this?
Well, I think we are too sentimental, emotional as a people, especially when it comes to government's business. And people think that they have a better answer, as it were, to national issues of challenge. Don't also forget that there were some realignment in terms of ministry and agency in terms of its creation. Some agency has to be scrapped, a new one has to be created so that they can be issue specific. Take, for example, the Ministry of Niger Data was taken away. And in recent times, you saw that there was also some realignment in that direction where the federal government had to deliberately create commissions for Southwest, Southeast, and Northeast, Northwest. Now, you can imagine that if these agencies themselves are now going to have their own ministry, just as the Niger Delta Development Commission has a ministry. So that will be a duplication. So what they've done there is that they have collapsed all the Development Commission into one single ministry and then to be headed by one minister. So all this had happened. The Ministry of Sports had also been scrapped. And what we're looking at is saying that people are focused on things that they should do. I think for me, really, it's not the number that the issue is, the deliverable that comes from it that's actually, with all the ministries, realignment and all of that, it doesn't mean that new civil servants are going to be employed, as it were. So all you find is that you're going to have that the realignment in terms of manpower from the bureaucracy to align with the new organogram of government. I think that is what it is for me.
If you look at the reassignment of some of the ministers, and some ministries that have been merged, some other ministries seem to have been subsumed in others. There are also reactions regarding that. Now, let's look at the reassignment. That of Ministry of Education now to be headed by someone who is a medical doctor, because the former the Minister of Education had been, was one of those who was let go. There are reactions regarding making a medical doctor Minister for Education. What's your thoughts?
You see, it's quite funny because as people, we don't even take moment to look at templates before we make comments. From day one, Nigeria took after the British system, which is the spoiled system. That's what they call it in public administration. That is to say that at the top echelon, you really don't need a professional, because down the line, you have professionals who will handle the work, because the work of the minister is not to go to the field to do some certain things, it's to provide leadership.
But how can you provide leadership if you're not an expert in that field?
You know, it's just to say that you have to be, you see, there are different aspects in the ministry that somebody had to oversee. Because if you say, for example, Ministry of Water Resources, do you think everybody in the Ministry of Water Resources is talking about water? There are accountants in those ministries, there are lawyers in those ministries, there are people who are economists in those ministries. So there are a lot of potpourri of professionals who come together in the ministry. And what the minister does is to provide leadership for these people. So you don't necessarily need to be a professional in that field to be able to say what will a leader do. That people bring in their proposals or they bring in their recommendations. Yours is to look at it. And don't also forget that these ministers also have their own special assistants who are also designated from different professions depending on the issue that is at stake. And these provisions are made in the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, for example, that you have to have aides who can help you. Ministries are given the opportunity to also appoint consultants who also advise them on things that is going to be done. But leadership here is the ability to pull all the manpower together and ensure that everybody is heading toward one direction. So it doesn't necessarily have to be somebody who has a specific expertise in a particular area. Take, for example, human resource management. Take the person in question, Dr. Idahosa. He has successfully run a business that they run in the US and moved to Nigeria, and they're doing very well in terms of the CASA. So if that person has been able to manage people in different enterprises to deliver value, even outside of this country, I think what is required is for him to coordination. That's what the work of the minister is. The minister is not the one who is in the line doing the job, because people have been employed to do that job. You have directors, you have assistant directors, you have managers, you have permanent secretaries who are specialists in that particular ministry to determine and say, this is what it is. You know, look at whatever thing you put on the ground is able to make decisions, just like the president himself does not need to be a specialist in all fields to become the president of Nigeria. So he will make decisions based on the issues that are brought to him, and of course also subject to expert advice.
I get your narrative, but another side to this is if you look at the Nigerian context, it also brings a situation, if you observe, where ministers, they assume duty and they are learning the ropes or the nitty-gritty of what is expected of them, or getting familiar with the terrain, whereby it will take them 1, 2, 3 months, sometimes 6 months, to get familiar with the peculiarity of the assignments and even the stakeholders. So that takes away the time that will have been devoted in solving problems from day one if you have an expert in that ministry. What's your take on that? That's another side to it.
Well, I think it's neither here or there. You see, it's believed commonly in the field of political science that the worst performing president that the world has ever produced were people who studied political science and came into to govern. You would have expected that because it's politics, they would be the better people to manage it because they have read the models. You see, what you find when you have experts taking leadership positions is the fact that they can be very lopsided and one-sided. They don't accept or entertain alternative viewpoints because they feel that what they know should be the way to go. Now, what you find, and that what has worked for British, is the fact that using this poise system is the fact that you allow somebody who is dispassionate, who really has no bias, to look at the common sense of whatever thing that you are putting on the table. That is why they have adopted that kind of an administrative system. And since independence, Nigeria has actually adopted that process. That look, you don't necessarily need to be an expert in the field to hold such leadership position. What you need to bring to the table is your ability to management and resource, which is very important. Take, for example, even if you appoint a minister today who comes into the office, it's not going to change the budget that is already written, for example. Number two, we are preparation for the 2025 budget is ongoing. I'm not sure that it's the minister who prepared the budget. Many of the ministers don't even know what goes into the budget, for example, to be able to determine.
It's also their responsibility to know, even if they
Yeah.
it.
You see, it's the way this ministry works. Because if you have to make a budget, you see, the user input is important. What the minister will do is that you bring the case to him and say, look, I want to spend XYZ amount this year. And he's only to say, okay, if you're spending XYZ, how does this align with our total goal that we're going to go? So you come to defend before the minister to say why this figure should be on the budget. So that is the role of the minister. So he will use his judgment as a leader to say, okay, this can go, this will not go. This align with what Mr. President wants to do, this does not align. But ultimately, it is the bureaucracy that will determine what course that will be taken at the end of the day. So it is not really the minister who make the call. His own is just to oversee what the bureaucracy is doing so that whatever thing that is presented align with whatever thing that the president wants to see or hear.
Talking about the president, there are also arguments that as some ministries were restructured, some ministers were assigned portfolios, that the Ministry of Petroleum Resources in Nigeria should have also been reassigned to maybe a new minister. The president is still the Minister of Petroleum in the country.
Well, that had become a trend for some time, and then for obvious reason, because number one, people have seen that the industry constitutes about 80% of the revenue that comes to the federal government, and therefore special eyes have to be on it. I really don't agree that the president must necessarily have to be the Minister of Petroleum, in my view, really. And I don't think that there's a need for us to hold tightly to what's happening in that ministry. For me, the problem in Nigeria is not about ministry. The problem in Nigeria is about what the bureaucracies are doing. And I think that's where the real key issues
But the minister has oversight functions over what the bureaucracies are doing.
Yeah, the minister is just the president's eye in the ministry. The president's eye in the ministry to say, okay, this is what the president wants to do, and this is what he wants to do.
Is that a way of saying the minister
yeah, but you
is
see,
a figurehead?
in terms of bureaucracy, what that means that you have the president as the Minister of Petroleum is that it actually removes some of bureaucracy, and this helps the process faster. So you see, because you are doing a memo to the minister, so right here, rather than do memo to the minister, who also has a subjective view about the issue, the memo goes straight to the president. So it makes things, it cuts short the time in terms of bureaucracy. So the minister will say, okay, I'm preparing my report to send to Mr. President. And until it gets to Mr. President at the FEC meeting or whatever Council of State meeting before some decision can be taken. But right here, the PAMSEC reports directly to the president because it's critical and you don't need too much of delay. So the president can see things real time because that's where the revenue is coming from. So he can see it from the dashboard. I think that's all of what these things are for me, not the basic thing that we can be talking about. One of the issues that I feel that Mr. President should really concern himself with is to see how to digitize the entire process of governance in Nigeria. That for me is what is most important. That whoever is the minister, whoever that is appointed into whatever office, is that everybody is operating in the current trend in the nation, which is of course digitization. That we can see things are done in real time, and the president can sit down in his office and see a dashboard and can see what ministries are doing and see who is working and who is not working. And I think that for me should be what the advocacy should be all about, not who take what office.
Okay, still on that Ministry of Petroleum, if some ministers were let go, assumed due to not so good performance, or the president had other reasons, but maybe expectations of Nigerians or of these ministers to have turn things around in the respective ministries, and they didn't meet that expectation. If we look at the Ministry of Petroleum and some of the issues that have come up from it, Nigerians expect that by now we should have functioning refineries in Nigeria. Does it not call for a shakeup of that particular ministry?
You see, that is the point that I'm making. For example, when you look at it, we cannot assess people based on performance. You have to assess them based on the resource that's available for them. You see, we must take it, government, from the perspective of everyday, ordinary human life. It's like somebody assessing me to say, oh, Idahosa, you have not done well because you don't live in Banana Island. For such person to assess my performance based on where I live, he also must factor in what's my income or source of my revenue. So, when you say refineries are not working, do we have the means to build a new refinery?
Do we have existing refineries?
But these are refineries built in the 1970s. Technology had changed.
Don't they have capacity at all?
As a matter of fact, I did a small analysis the other day. I was speaking to some set of people from that industry, and I told them, you take, for example, Dangote built a new refinery spending about 20 billion US dollars, the largest single trade refinery in the whole of Africa. Now, the cost of the turnaround maintenance of these refineries, we're talking the 4 refineries, and the operational cost put together in the last 10 years is over 25 billion US dollars, which is enough to build a new refinery. See, what we've been doing is like putting in a car that its chassis and its body are terrible, and you're going to put a new engine inside it. No matter how new the engine you put inside that is, it can't fit the structure of that new car. So you'll still be having problem. So that's what the turnaround of this refinery for me looks like. So it can only become a drain pipe for some people to just make money out of the system. Building a new refinery will be a better option. But unfortunately, government can't cough out 20 billion to build a new refinery. So what that means is that you need a lot of investment in that sector. And government currently don't have that money. Don't forget, in the last Independence Day program, the president told us that before he came, we were doing 98% of our revenue to service debt. People must have this background, that if you are spending 98% of all the revenue you are getting to service your debt, what is left for you for both overhead and capital project is just 2%. Now they are driving that process. And what we have seen is the fact that as at the October 1 broadcast, the president told us that now they are spending 68% of our revenue for the service of debt. So which means, of course, you still have like 32% to play around with. So these are some of the things that are happening. And then, of course, you're seeing the building of wealth. Just about 2 days ago, the CBN governor, or the finance minister, told us that Nigerian foreign reserve had increased from the 37 that was announced at Independence Day broadcast to now 40 billion US dollars. So which means, of course, we are making some savings and the economy is taking its shape. So what people are expecting is this structural reform to see how we can reduce some of all these issues. And one of the things that also happened yesterday was the fact that there was a statement signed by the president himself that all the ministers must cut down on how they spend money, and that no minister or head of agency of government should drive more than 3 cars in a convoy. And all these things are put in place to see how we can cut costs and then invest whatever that is saved into those critical infrastructure environment that we all talk about. So this is going to take some process. Except that it is possible to plant a corn today and harvest it today, then of course people can have these kind of expectations that we're having of the regime, as it were. I think we must be objective. While we are emotionally very charged because of the level of suffering that is going on, but we must understand that if you plant a corn today, you will need to wait for 3 months for it to produce some fruits.
All right. Let's look at the decision to scrap a sensitive ministry like the Ministry of Sports, which has been largely criticized by some of the stakeholders. Now, that responsibility has been assigned to the National Sport Commission, which, what do you make of that decision? Will it give rise to a situation whereby the sport affairs in Nigeria has been clamored by some stakeholders should be managed by technocrats or experts rather than politicians? Are you going to have that now with the way this has been done? You have that responsibility now assigned to the National Sports Commission, which you believe where you have the experts who understand the sports situation in Nigeria. What impact will that make? And what are the mistakes that can be corrected here now that this responsibility is assigned to the National Sports Commission? People will argue before now, when it comes to sports in Nigeria, sports administration has been trailed with all challenges. Will it get better now that the responsibility has been assigned to the National Sports Commission?
Yeah, but I think the president himself has said the rationale for making this decision is that it wants sports, which of course is a very, very veritable instrument for national cohesion and for economic development of states to be handled more professionally. So you don't just throw it into the bureaucracy. So you are seeing that experts are there and they are focusing on these issues. And then, of course, they have their own line budget and they are not going to be relying on the bureaucracy of government to function, which, of course, really has hampered the development of sports in Nigeria, as it were. So what this means is that just like every other commission, is that their own is about sports, and you have professionals who are there doing their business, and they have their own budget. They are not now going to be relying on the ministry or the bureaucracy within the ministry to be able to function. And then whatever the development that needs in that area, you can find. I was telling somebody yesterday, when, of course, the decision to, for example, mend the commissions of the Niger Delta into one regional ministry. And I said, I did a calculation of expenditure when I was doing my master's program some years back, and I saw that in terms of financing, when NDDC was established, 20% of its budget was spent on overhead. 80% was spent on capital projects. When the Ministry of Niger Delta was appointed, NDDC was spending over 80% on overhead and less than 20% on capital projects. It shows you how bureaucracy reorder the priorities of an agency. So when you have a commission whose work is just basically not narrowly political and they're facing their technical issues, and you have a lane administration, so more money you spend on paying salaries, travel allowances, and all of that take chunk of government revenue, now you can actually develop. And then, of course, you can actually create an economy around the commission. So that's what I expect from the Ministry of Sport, the Sport Commission right now, that they now have the responsibility, and the Director General of that commission is able to know his onion enough to invest critically in developing sports, because the potential is there for us. Over 200 million people, and we are not able to win basic tournaments in major sports, and that's not fair enough. So once you have this commission now focus on grassroots development and the rest of it, then you find that we are going to get better results in terms of sports.
Now, still, let's look again at the Ministry of Regional Development. That's the new ministry after scrapping the Niger Delta Development Commission, which the new minister, Engineer Abubakar Momo, says NDDC wasn't scrapped, it was only renamed Ministry of Regional Development, and its activities expanded to now cover other regions. If you look at the aim of setting up the NDDC, which was to facilitate sustainable development in the Niger Delta region, and then you now have other regions in one ministry, is that not too bogus, a ministry
No. I don't think so.
Would that lead to efficiency?
NDDC has never been scrapped. But NDDC just became an agency under the Ministry of Niger Delta. Now, what happened is the fact that there's also been clamor for people, because the real reason of creating NDDC in the first place was the suffering that the people of the Niger Delta has suffered due to oil spillages and exploration from that region. And there was a lot that needed to be done to clean up the environment so that there be investment in that place so that people can have good life. I remember in 2006, I was doing a survey around the NDDC state, and I was somewhere in Port Harcourt, and the people were telling us that when they use this corrugated iron sheet to roof their houses, they change it every 6 months. You see that kind of impact. That people said, oh, we used to be fishermen, we can no longer get fishes in the river because of the pollution that is going on. So they can't do the normal agricultural practices, which they are used to because of the impact in that environment. Now, a lot of people brought up argument that, look, okay, Boko Haram has also destroyed the economy of the Northeast. And there's a need for a specific intervention in this area. Then, of course, the Southeasterners said they have never been addressed after the Civil War. That all the catastrophe that came with the Civil War, nobody has addressed it. That there's a need for a special commission to focus on rehabilitating and rejuvenating the economy of the Southeast following the catastrophe that was brought by the Civil War. So this agitation had been there. So what this administration had done was to create these commissions for Southwest, create a commission for Southeast, create a commission for Northeast and Northwest. Now you have multiple commissions. And on the one hand, people were also agitating that NDDC was not functioning because it was not a ministry. And a certain regime had to accede to that and create a ministry, specific ministry for NDDC. Now, the question here is, if NDDC has a special ministry, are we also going to have the Ministry of Southeast Development Commission or Northeast Development Commission or Southwest Development Commission? So it's just wise that all these commissions can be brought together under one single umbrella. And what the minister has done, or what the president did, was to ensure that the man who has been managing the Ministry of the Niger Delta Development Commission, just one agency now has like 6 agencies, all the regions are now having their commission under one ministry. But like I said to somebody yesterday, it will only be a matter of time, because we have to see that whoever becomes the minister of this regional commission had to come from either of the development commissions within that ministry. So if you have, for example, Abubakar from the South today, which is NDDC, then maybe the next minister has to come from some Southeast, or so that it can have this balance in terms of sense of belongingness and representation.
It's not making it very political. Would that result in efficiency? My question is this. Now, if you put a ministry that attends to all the regions of the country to see to their challenges, and then, like you suggested, perhaps at one point in time, there will be a rotation of the headship based on regions, does it not become a political ministry at the end of the day? How does that translate to better development for these regions?
Well, you must not forget that the reason why we adopted federation, or the federal system, is because of the diversity that we currently live with. That's the reality, that people of different backgrounds, you cannot wish them away. But for you to give them a sense of belongingness, then they must have to be part and parcel of the system. And that is why the federal arrangement remains the best fit for us as a country, because that's the only way you can represent everybody and they have a sense of belongingness. We can't take that away. It's not just politics. It's also the fact that you are in an environment and you're saying, can we also find somebody good enough from your region to actually also drive this process so that people will not be accused of biases. That's why it's managing a diverse or a multi-ethnic environment is always very terrible. And I think one of the best examples of managing this diversity is from Canada. that adopted what they call the constitutional form of democracy, where specific ethnic groups and nationality are given the kind of specific assignment that is associated with that particular group. So if you are from, for example, an agrarian side of Canada, you cannot be given a portfolio for Ministry of Finance. You have to be Minister for the Agric, because you should know the terrain and know what to do with it. These are the reality that we are dealing with. So you can't wish that away. That people will always feel that, okay, maybe because this man is from this part of the society, that's why he's giving some preferences to his people. And also don't forget that in the use of power, that those who hold power sometimes are very conscious that they don't want to be accused of bias, and they necessarily have to neglect their own side and focus on this other side, on the other side. If you remember, in the days of President Olusegun Obasanjo, a lot of people accused him and said he didn't develop the roads in the southwest, and it was not because he intelligently don't want to, but he don't want to be accused of being biased, that he's favoring his ethnic group as against other people's ethnic group. So leaders are also very conscious of this fact, that when you are representing a people, you want to prove to the other people who are part of this ethnic group that, look, there's a balancing effect that is going on here, so that I will not be accused of being biased. And therefore, I have to focus on this other side. And tendency is that you may neglect your own side. So that balancing also, or rotation, we create that balance, so that when I neglect my own side, then when the person from this other side cannot concentrate on my side, so he's also afraid of being biased. All this stuff, the psychology of the management of power. So it does happen, and you cannot rule them away. So these are the things that are affecting us. And I think this is where people really must put the emphasis. For me, really, what we should emphasize is the people that are appointed, are they qualified enough? Would they be able to deliver value? Some people spoke about the appointment of the ex-wife of the architect of the Biafra into the cabinet. And I think for me, it's also a very smart move by the president to also say we recognize and that we are one. And the war has ended, and it has ended. And so we're integrating, and we want to see this integrated. So here, really, the minister is overseeing. But what is fundamental is the fact that our bureaucracy, which is top-notch, must do their job very well and advise the minister rightly so that he can deliver on value. But in terms of integration and national unity, what this also suggests is the fact that for the first time, we are seeing that the Biafrans are integrated into the mainstream of the central government in Abuja. So this, for me, is a positive development.
Now, or should we refer to them as people from, you know, the regional?
No, we can't wish away the struggle of IPOB. We cannot wish it away because it's a national reality. And those who are championing that move, whether those who are within the country or those who are outside of the country, recently, I think it was yesterday, I saw a disclaimer from Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala reacting to a post on Simon Ekman's handle that they secure some loan to fund their operation outside of the country. But this, for me, is managing diversity, and I think it's a very smart move by the president.
All right, don't let us divert into another thing. But before we go, I want us to talk about, as we wrap up, the decision to merge tourism, the Ministry of Tourism, with art and culture. Now it's going to be tourism, culture, and creative economy. You're aware of what UAE has done with tourism. What kind of innovation are you expecting this time around? Now that the ministry has been merged, what kind of efficiency, giving the example of a place where you've been, like UAE, what they've done with tourism, and then creating impact from creative economy?
I think it's another aim for Mr. President to really have merged that ministry.
But again, is it not too big to bring creative economy, culture?
Our creativity.
Will some not die at the expense of others?
Our creative economy. They are all tied around our culture. Tourism, anywhere in the world, is tied around people's culture. So you really cannot divorce the two. to say that you have a special ministry that is focusing. So what are we highlighting? If we are saying we are opening up Nigeria for people to visit, we are saying, oh, there is a Kogosi River somewhere in Ondo State. Ekiti State, yeah. Now, people have to come to that. Now, but when you go to Ikogosi, you will know that there's a whole lot of story that's surrounding that river, which form part of the lifestyle of the people in that environment. So what you are doing is actually putting the entire thing, the potpourri of it, in one ministry, so that the synergy that is required between culture and tourism, you can actually establish it. If you are going to Benin, what are you going to see? You want to go and see the bronze, I mean, the artifacts. That's what you're going to see. So these are the kind of things that you are looking at, that you have created a Ministry of Culture, Tourism, and Creative Art. All our movies, whether it's India movie, whether it's American movie, all movies are tied around the people's culture somehow. And so I think that they should actually be in the same portfolio. And you have one man who can oversee it. So you don't need to have these interministerial differences of a Minister of Culture needing to now come to have some sitting with the Minister of Tourism to be able to reach some level of agreement. And I think that's one thing for me that also was a very good thing or smart move to do, to put them all in the same place. And we're looking at it from the point of view, but one person is answerable to tourism, culture, and creative economy. But like we said, really, I really still feel that the numbers are many in my own view, 47 ministers, many in my own view. America is a bigger state, and then of course you have about 13 secretaries who drive the entire process. So I don't think it's the major that for me is the issue. What is the issue is the fact that we are creating an economy where of course we save more money and we can invest really. But you can't talk about tourism without significant investment. And I also feel that the government need to do a lot in terms of creating an ecosystem where we can see much money, that domes are built here, skyscrapers are put in this place, and these are the things that actually attract people to say they want to visit and see the wonders that you have created. So it's not just enough to create a ministry, but it's to see how we can actually empower this ministry to build structures that will attract foreigners to want to visit.
Talking about attracting foreigners, a new minister for the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment has been appointed, and that's Dr. Jumoke Oduwole. Before her appointment, she served as a special advisor to the president on ease of doing business in the office of the vice president. And there have been some reactions regarding that this time around, these new ministers that are appointed, some seem to be square pegs in square holes. What are your expectations for this new, regarding these new appointees?
Yeah, I think for Oduwole, it will be a very, very familiar terrain. Not just, even before this administration, in the former administration, he was still in that ecosystem of ease of doing business. So he has been there for a long time. He knows what the issues are. He knows what the challenges she faced dealing with the ministers who may not have same perspective on issues. But now she's the head of the saddle, so she should be able to drive that process. And people are expecting that she brings in a lot of energy into that Ministry of Trade so that Nigeria really will be able to have an environment that is friendly for investment. So having plenty that expectation, I think the expectations are high. People want to see her deliver value, as it were. And I hope she will not disappoint those who appoint her also. But really, we must also understand that the global economy is really passing through difficult times, and movement of cash here and there is difficult, and there's really little people can do. But let us see how can foster trade between first West African states, then Africa, and see all those barriers and blockages around after are taken out, so that Africa can trade with themselves, and then of course see what opportunity that Nigeria can make from after, and then of course other sub-regional economic forums or bodies.
Okay, now let's see how we can help the present administration to learn from history, the mistake of the past. You've had ministers who have served, in this cabinet. What are the common mistakes you think some of the ministers who were asked to go, who were let go, what are some of the common mistakes you think they've made? And then the new ones should improve on. And then for the president's administration, now that you have, you've somehow reshuffled your cabinet, what are your expectations? What are some of the far-reaching decisions you expect the president to take at a critical time like this?
Yeah, I think that the bigger problem that most politicians make is the fact that they think that once you are appointed, you become the headmaster and anything you say goes. And that's a problem. And the ability to sync with the bureaucracy is a problem. And so sometimes the bureaucrats allow them to fool themselves. And then, of course, they become exposed. And their weakness is seen by everybody. Anybody who is appointed into a leadership position is a common advice. You don't go into a ministry and disrupt the whole things you find and say you have your own vision that you want to pursue. The proper thing to do is to first ask how things are done here. Because the ministry and the agencies are creations of the law. There are laws, there are policy documents that are there that drive the entire process. So what you see is the fact that some ministries, ministers don't even have recourse to some of all these things. And this is, of course, again, the point of ignorance that a lot of people speak when they are not in the system. They just think that if you don't enter a system, you can just do anything. You can't do anything because the civil service is governed by laws, rules and regulations, reforms, policy statements, the orders that are sent by the document. So those laws, you can't push them aside. Because what you find is that when you try to do something against the law, then of course it catches up with you. You are doing litigations today, tomorrow, and next tomorrow. You will not be able to actually deliver value, which some of the ministers would have fallen into that trap. So I will advise those who are coming in as new ones to first study the environment, look at the rules and regulations, extant laws that drives the entire process. You know, one of all these things that people don't really know, because Nigeria, we have made so many laws since 1921, we have been undergoing a lot of constitutional reform. And it will amaze you to know that some of the laws that were made at independence, many of them had not been repealed. They are still in existence. So you need to study all the laws that governs the entire process. So if you want to effect a change, then of course you will have to first of all seek the approval of either your boss, which is Mr. President, to write a bill to send to the National Assembly to first undo the law before you can start your reform. But most of the time, they want some certain thing done, and the civil servants say, we cannot do this because there's a law here that says we cannot act this way. And then you find that you spend more time fighting within the ministry, trying to exert authority and force, and then you end up not delivering. But I think that's understanding between the bureaucracy and the appointed minister is quite key and important, that they can sit down around the table and look at it. How does things run here? What are the laws that governs us? Are all of them adequate? Are there things that we need to refine or change? And then you can have that conversation and the buy-in of your staff, as it were, and then you can actually pursue and drive a reform.
Okay, for some of the ministers that were let go, and then the ones reassigned and new appointments. Now, some persons have been looking at the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs and Poverty Reduction since the suspension of the former minister. Looking at it, will she be reinstated? When the cabinet is reshuffled, will she be reassigned? But this clears it that, hey, suspension, and then she's permanently out of the cabinet. What message does that send to ministers, serving ministers, and the incoming ministers about the tolerance of this current administration to misconduct, allegations, and all regarding serving ministers?
Yeah, it's a point I'm making. It was just a simple blunder that was made by the minister. Simple blunder. And that's because there were no recourse to the bureaucrats. If you shall allow the bureaucrats to guide her, she will not fall into this trouble. So this is a problem. That's what I'm talking about. That if somebody appoints you and gives you an office, you don't just go there and say, oh, President wants me to deliver. I must deliver at all costs. No. You have to study the environment to understand how things work.
Does that also suggest too that there may be some kind of pressure on the ministers to deliver, and this pressure may expose them to some mistakes?
Yeah, definitely. Of course, those pressures are there. The thing is that once you want to embark on a change, there's a process for change management. And this is one of the issues that we talk to people about, that in terms of managing change, you have to deploy systematically the tools for change management. That you don't go drastic to say you want to disrupt an entire process that's already put in place. You must follow it systematically, depending on what model or approach that you want to use. And I think this is what a lot of people don't understand. Many people in Nigeria, unfortunately, believe that we don't have laws. But unfortunately, we have handfuls of laws that govern every single aspect of our lives. And if you don't pay attention to them and you fall foul of that law, then of course you will be in the eye of the storm. So this is what the issues are. And I think the new ministers must also take these precautions while they come into office and understand that, look, it's a structure and you cannot overturn it one night. I remember some years ago, I think it was when Bill Clinton was contesting election, and then they were very young, and George Bush, they were having this conversation of how they want to change America. And old president was asked and said, these guys are making very fantastic promises that they want to turn America around. How possible? And the old man laughed and said, well, when they get to the White House will bend them because they cannot bend the White House. So that is the power of bureaucracy. And I think everybody must have to respect that. Otherwise, those civil servants that you think they don't know anything, they can help you to fall.
On a final note, on behalf of the female constituency of Nigeria, so 3 women out of the out of the cabinet, 3 women in, but it still falls short of the 35% affirmative action.
Well, we are moving gradually. Hopefully that we also need a lot of participation. You see, because people must understand, politics is about participation. I actually say I don't believe in affirmative action myself.
Why don't you believe so?
Because I don't believe that there's anybody who has written any rule anywhere that women should be second class in society, except that they have accepted that status for themselves. I said to somebody, when you look at the demography and the population of Nigeria, for example, if all women decide to vote for themselves, they can become president. So they don't need 35%. They can actually struggle for 80%. So why would you be looking for 35% when 80% is available? So I don't believe in affirmative action. It's to ask all women to participate in the process. And so when you go to your table and you have something to bring to the table to say, yes, we want to govern Nigeria because we have the numbers. And then people will say, oh, yes, you really have the numbers. So if you win, you win. But if you don't win, you don't win. That is what it is. But women are not participating enough. And I think that's why the number is still as where it is. So they need a lot of more participation.
Power is not served a la carte.
Yes, of course, it's a buffet, so you have to go grab yours.
All right.
All right, we just have to leave this conversation here. You see why you're the right man for this conversation. Interestingly, from your background, you run training for leaders, for executives in this regard, as regards bureaucracy, transparency, courtesy of African Development Center. Maybe that's a subtle advert for that center, but we must thank you for providing insight, and your experience has come to be as regards this development. Thank you so much, Dr. Idahosa Osamhanze, for spending time with us this morning.
Always a pleasure to be on the exchange. Thank you so very much, Femi. Blessing. A great day.
Thank you so much.
Early exchange, shaping policy, advancing development.